Hi everyone, welcome back to the Coin Republic's Money and Me podcast, which is all about empowering you in blockchain era. And today we have one such visionary from the Web3 blockchain space. We have Mouloukou, who's the CEO and co-founder of Mansa, and himself as well as Mansa. They've been up to some amazing work in the developing nations like Africa, among others. But we'd love to know more about Mouloukou, your journey, how it has been in the Web3 space. How did you enter the rabbit hole that we call blockchain? And of course, about more about Mansa. All yours. The stage is all yours, Mouloukou.
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, on your show, Varuni. I've been looking forward to this. And hi to everybody watching at home or from wherever. So my name is Mouloukou. A quick background into myself. My parents are from Guinea. I'm from Holland. But because of the nature of my dad's job, I had the opportunity to live and grow up all over the world, mainly in Asia, in China, and in Hong Kong. um Essentially, I first got into crypto in 2018 when I did an internship at a cryptocurrency exchange called Trade.io. They did one of the biggest ICOs of the year. We raised around $40 million. I was a token listing analyst, so I would list all the tokens that were trying to come on our exchange, and that was such transformational internship for me, and such an eye opener. It was the first time that I actually interacted with crypto, and it was at the beginning where people barely even knew what it was. So like that was amazing. I then worked for a venture builder called Evers Ventures Group. We helped companies fundraise, companies such as like Animoca, Yugo Labs, so on and so forth. And then we also built a few really big category defining companies, the biggest of which being Aspen Digital, which essentially went on to partner with the Rothschilds, and at some point managed over like eight figures, essentially like AUM. I then worked in private equity, and I did two things afterwards. I ran the largest Web3 focused VC fund on the African continent called the Adaverse, and I also built one of Africa's largest crypto startups called Kasama Network. I started Mansa about a year ago, and essentially the goal for Mansa is to build the stablecoin payment railways into emerging markets. We've been live for essentially 65 days. And
Mm-hmm.
in the past 65 days, we've managed to do $4 million in on chain volume and over $2 million in payments finance to emerging markets.
Wow. Those are great numbers, Muluku. I mean, just 65 days and the kind of numbers, the kind of payments or transactions that you're talking about are, of course, amazing. What did you already sort of visualize this happening? And how did you guys achieve such amazing numbers in such less time? I would love to know more about the current developments that have been happening in Manza, including the ones that you spoke about.
Thank you so much. So essentially, I believe that okay, so I did not expect us to grow this fast, but I think it's a function of the efficiencies that we currently have in the traditional Web 2 payment system. Because when you think about it, payments to emerging markets are incredibly slow. On average, takes 3 to 7 days to send money to Africa, Latin, or even some places in Southeast Asia. The fees are incredibly expensive. I think, according to the World Bank, sending money to Africa takes 10%, to Southeast Asia, I think another 5%, and to Latin America, 6-ish%. And these are the places that receive the most amount of remittance from across the world. I think India, for example, gets 100 billion. The African continent gets 60 billion. Latin gets another, I think, 100 billion ish. And given these fees, like these companies are racking in incredibly expensive fees. So essentially, like many people go to traditional or like new type of like fintechs to essentially for their cross-border payments. But in order for these fintechs to essentially enable instant transactions, they need to undergo a process called pre-funding. For example, like I'm in New York right now. If I was a remittance company that wanted to offer instant settlement to my clients in India, for example, I must keep 50, at least a minimum of $50,000 sitting in a bank account in India that my customers can essentially withdraw from. That's called pre-funding. Now that works like when I want to do one location or two locations. But if I want to scale, it becomes incredibly cost prohibitive, because that $50,000 needs to come essentially from my own balance sheet. So that's why when you look at the remittance market, it's really a duopoly with Western Union and MoneyGram, because they have the balance sheet that is required for them to essentially scale. 90% of the market is a long tail of essentially smaller players. So what we do, we're like, okay, we go to these fintech and payment companies and we tell them that you do not need to keep these pre-funded accounts anymore. We will leverage DeFi and we will provide you a 1 to 5 day essentially revolving line of credit. So you don't need pre-funding anymore. Whenever you have a transaction that needs to get paid, we will go ahead and we will pay your payout partners for you, and we will provide you the liquidity in essentially stable coins. And we currently have more demand than we can handle. We currently have approximately over $50 million in weekly liquidity demand that we simply just cannot like keep up with, because most payment companies have over 2 to 5x more demand than they can currently service.
Absolutely. Were you anticipating this kind of a demand? Of course, there were roadblocks. There were issues that people were facing. If you look at the enterprise side as well as the retail side, there were a lot of issues which you guys rightly pinpointed, I feel, and must have anticipated the sort of demand that you are seeing. So, is there anything that Mansa has in place currently for dealing with this sort of a demand? And also, when we talk about what's in works, I would also love to know about your vision for Mansa. It's just been 60 days, but 65 days. But what is the plan for the next 6 months, 60 years? What is the vision? And in terms of the demand, how are you guys going to be tackling that?
Yes, that's a great question. So essentially, that's for the high demand is essentially why we chose payments in particular, right? Especially like if you just look at a small subset of the payments, which is just remittance. There's 100 billion to Latin, 60 billion to Africa, and like over 100 billion to like India as well, right? There's more, and like when you look at B2B payments, there are hundreds of billions of B2B payments like they're being conducted like every day, which so like the market is incredibly liquid. And that's the main reason why we essentially chose to build a DeFi protocol in this space, because we will be able to aggregate significant amount of liquidity and deploy significant amount of liquidity by financing existing transactions. So most of the clients we deal with, the smallest one does $100 million in annual volume, and the biggest one right now does over $1 billion in essentially annual volume. And this is actually quite deliberate to make sure that we always have more demand than we have liquidity to supply. So that means that we always have more room to essentially scale, and like we always have essentially more room to essentially deploy as well. And for the vision of the company is like we want to bring the entire payment stack on chain, and like make payments into emerging markets cheaper, faster, and more transparent. So currently right now we have over $5 million in essentially committed capital to invest on the pools. From that $5 million, we are actually going to be financing $50 million in monthly transaction volume, because essentially we turn over the capital an average of 10 times given the short duration of the transactions, right? We give money on Monday, we get paid back Tuesday, or we get paid back Wednesday, over and over and over again, which means like the capital is being used to finance 10x more payments. So that would mean that over the next 12 months, we're actually going to be doing $600 million worth of transaction volume, which would put us among like some of the fastest growing fintechs ever. And at that point, when we're financing $600 million worth of transaction volume, what essentially we're seeking to do is to provide payouts for those transactions as well. Because so it goes from financing and then it goes to actually selling those transactions as well. So what you have is we would have built the stablecoin railways into emerging markets.
That's super interesting. I'm sure that when you were trying to figure out what challenges people were facing in these emerging markets, you had a list and you wanted to straight up work on those and address those issues. If you can also talk about, in detail, if you can talk about the certain challenges that you first figured out before, of course, the inception of Mansa. What sort of challenges did you figure out were the persisting challenges that emerging markets like Africa, Latin America, India were sort of facing, and especially pertaining to cross-border payments? If you could talk about those roadblocks first,
Yeah.
and then maybe about how Mansa is trying to address all of those.
Yes, that was an amazing question. So essentially, like a lot of these challenges were personal as well. I remember, so I went to college in Hong Kong, and my parents used to send me money from Africa to Western Union, and every time they would send me the money, the amount I thought I would receive was completely different from what I actually got because of the huge fees that Western Union would charge. And I remember as well so many times where I came 1 to 2 minutes late before Western Union closed, and I couldn't get money like for the whole weekend, like because most of them were closed like on the weekend. So like I have a lot of personal grudges against
Right.
the current like financial system. But also like on top of that, right? Like I think there's a more serious issue here at play. For example, from my business account in Hong Kong, I am unable to send money to Nigeria, to Kenya, and to many countries in Latin America and to many countries in Southeast Asia as well, because they are on the gray list for some supposed reason, right? And I think it's impossible to imagine that these economies can develop without being able to comfortably send money back and forth from like across the world, right? So like that's why I believe that blockchain and like crypto and payments moving on chain is really the only solution for these economies to really develop and really accelerate their growth.
Absolutely. So, if I'm not wrong, Mouloukou, Manza sources capital from institutional and accredited investors. If you could explain what that exactly is, how it's different from all the other players in the market, and how do you leverage your experience and expertise? You've already been in this space for quite some time, you've worked with VCs. So, how did you come across the idea of having investors or institutional players on board when sort of looking at all of these problems? And how does your experience as an investor working in investment VC firms added to Mansa's growth when we speak about specifically risk management for investors?
That's a great question. So essentially, when you look at the overall DeFi landscape right now, especially when you look at like real world assets and tokenized private credits, I believe there's currently $9 billion locked in all these private credit vaults across Centrifuge, Maple, and others, and all of that is yielding just a very low 9% per year. But when you compare it to the actual private credit space, which is $1.6 trillion, like it's like we're less than essentially 10% of the overall market size, right? And I think one of the things that is slowing down the growth is the low yield, because if
Mm-hmm.
I can earn 5% on my T-bills, or like even higher like with some high yield bonds, it doesn't make sense for me to essentially invest in the tokenized private credit deals that are in the market right now, especially given the long lockups. Like many of them, like the lockups are 6 months all the way to essentially 2 years. It's not really attractive. So like what I believe is that if we really want to grow the private credit space and to become much larger, we need to offer double digit risk adjusted yield. And I believe that payments is the essentially perfect use case. Why? Number one, it's highly liquid. There are billions of dollars of payments every day. Number two, the
Mm-hmm.
short-term transaction of these payments, like payments are usually closed in 24 hours, maximum 3 days. And because of the nature of the short-term transactions and because of the high liquidity as well that's in the system, you're able to earn exponential yields as well. So many of these payment companies charge between zero point 0.3 to 1 to 2% per transactions. And they're doing hundreds of transactions like on a daily basis, or like even thousands of transactions like on a monthly basis. So they're able to essentially earn an exponential amount of money. So we essentially take a cut of their revenues, and through that, we're able to offer investors 20% per year. Mansa, the protocol itself, is currently generating 3% per month, which is 26% per year. So that's how we're able to give yield back to the token holders, which is higher than you would find anywhere else currently in the crypto market, higher than Centrifuge, higher than Maple, or like any of the other larger players. And given my previous investment background, for me, the most important thing is essentially the risk management. Because when you're providing liquidity, you are essentially managing risk. And that is the business that we are essentially in. But payments are, in my opinion, one of the best assets to essentially manage risk for. And if you look at the transaction like of a payment, if I wanted to send you money right now, and I'm not too sure like where you're based, but I would have to first go to my remittance company or cross-border payments company, and I would have to give them money. They would give me like a receipt, and then they would initiate a transfer for you. And what happens in the back end is that when you have given them money, like when I've given them money here in New York, and you are like, for example, anywhere in Asia, that's when
Yeah.
they draw down on their line of credit and essentially disperse the funds to you. So that's essentially the same thing with us. Once there's an actual off-chain transaction that is set to happen, then only then the companies can essentially draw down from our line of credit. And we have an API that's in a CRM, so we're able to see all the transactions real time. So all transactions that we do are actually backed by real life transactions that's actually happening off chain. So it's all back one to one. Furthermore, when we work with the companies, as mentioned, the smaller companies that we deal with does $100 million per year, while the largest does over like $1 billion. So these are very well established companies that have like huge track records of anywhere from minimum 3 to 5 years. So they're well capitalized as well, and have a well capitalized balance sheet as well. So we take a lien on the assets against the balance sheet. So we only offer 80% LTV based on their balance sheet assets. So we're actually over collateralized by 120%. So like we
Wow.
should make sure that not only, yes, so not only is the liquidity backed one to one, but we're able to recover assets that are worth more than the liquidity that we have provided.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When we talk about, of course, managing risk, we have to also critically look at regulations and compliance and regulation, especially in the DeFi space for entrepreneurs, has been something that they've struggled with for a lot longer than we imagine. How has regulation and compliance been at Manza? And you're in a rather tricky business when we talk about cross-border payments or liquidity, managing liquidity. So, how's your team keeping up with the changing narrative around regulations across the globe?
Keeps me up all night. No, but yeah, but essentially, so in order to attract liquidity, the way that essentially we're set up is we're set up in a fund structure, and we only deal with accredited investors or really high caliber institutional investors. Right, so we're not open to retail at all. Everybody has to attest that they're an accredited investor in order to access our pools. But then on the other, but then right, like on the other side, but then essentially on the other side, for the liquidity provision, we only work with licensed payment companies. So all these payment companies are licensed in all their different jurisdictions. So what we're doing is we're simply providing them the stable coin liquidity. The final disbursement is done either by the payment company themselves or the payout partner that they work with. So we don't touch fiat. So at this point right now, we are not licensed at all because we don't require to be licensed because there's no off-chain activity that essentially happens. But once we move into payouts, doing the payouts ourselves, that's when we will get money service businesses licensed.
Yeah, makes sense. A lot of the decentralized space or decentralized finance is about inclusion of different geographies, different caste, creeds. How has Manza sort of kept that vision alive when we talk about helping or aiding developing nations like India, Africa, or even Latin American nations feel more empowered in terms of financial inclusion? How sort of Manza been able to keep that vision straight? And if you could talk about certain steps that Manza took, or how how the kind of financial inclusion that we talk about in the decentralized finance space also aligns with the vision of Manza, that would be great, Maluku, if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, definitely, and like that's a great question. So essentially, the main goal of what I'm doing is trying to make payments into emerging markets fairer, cheaper, and essentially faster as well. And that's essentially what we're striving for. Because as I mentioned, right, remittance and cross-border payments are the lifeline of like some economies, right? And in some like developing nations, like they compromise over 50%. Oh, sorry, like or like around like a quarter or more of the GDP, right? Like of that company. And currently, like right now, like they're getting absolutely murdered like by the fees like of these traditional payment companies, and the new payment companies are not able to meet the rising demand. So there's more people that want to send money than these payment companies can actually offer at a fair price and at like a good settlement time, right? So we're leveraging DeFi, like leveraging crypto for real life use cases, like so then we can work with some of the best remittance companies that help people send money to these developing nations
Mm-hmm.
so that they can continue and that they can finance more transactions at scale. So that is essentially our thesis, like to be able to help these developing economies.
Absolutely. When we talk about goals, of course, there are quarterly, yearly goals that firms have in terms of what would be where Mansa would be, or what the short term goals as well as long term goals at Mansa would be. If you could just list those out and let our users know a little bit more about where we would be seeing Mansa in the next couple of months as the year closes, as well as in the next couple of years.
Yes, yes. So please follow us on Twitter. That's Mansa Finance _.co. Please follow me as well. Mansa dot MLK is my personal Twitter. We You can find us on Medium as well, and you can find us on LinkedIn. The team and I are constantly at some of the biggest crypto conferences around the world, Token, ETC, and the US conferences as well. So please like follow our like social media pages. We also have the app as well. So if you're interested in providing liquidity, please do so.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mouloukou. I was also wondering if we talk about partnerships, collaborations, of course, the kind of space that we're in, the space runs on the kind of collaboration that we see between Web3 firms. If you can give a few examples or cite a few examples about recent partnerships or collaborations that you guys have had at Mansa, that would be great.
Yes, yes. So we recently partnered with Polytrade, which is like some of the like which is one of the largest real world asset marketplaces, and we actually have a pool live on them, right? So like what this essentially does, it essentially gives us access to the millions of users and like liquidity that Polytrade actually has on its platform. Furthermore, we've partnered with Cordora. They're backed by S&P 500 and they're backed by Moody's as well. They are the preeminent credit rating and monitoring startup in crypto. They well, so in addition to our own risk reports and risk management that we they write an additional risk report that LPs can access, feel comfortable with. They give us an indicative risk scoring as well, and there are a few other really large conversations that we're having with some of the largest DeFi protocols in this space as well. So soon, hopefully, you'll be able to access Mansa yields from practically all the best yield sources in the space.
Wow, and I'm sure that we'll be expecting a lot more announcements and partnerships and collaborations coming in from Manza in this year as well as the coming year. But if you talk about certain trends or certain opportunities that you see in the cross-border payment space, what would they be, Muluku? And the space, of course, keeps on evolving. And now with DeFi, AI, all of these current trends in place, are there any key trends or opportunities that you guys are particularly eyeing?
Yes, yes. So I think the biggest trend that we're eyeing is essentially the growth of stablecoins. So if you so from over 50% of all transactions in of all crypto transactions in Latin America and Africa and also Southeast Asia are all in stablecoins. Because number one, people are using stablecoins, number one, as a hedge against inflation. So like currencies like the Argentinian peso or the Nigerian naira have devalued on unfathomable amount, like against the US dollars, right? And then number two, people are using that for the ease of sending and receiving money, like given the high cost of many of the current options, like available for them, right? So Mansa, like what we're doing is we're trying to like accelerate the growth of stablecoin adoption in payments in emerging markets. That's why all the liquidity that we're providing is all stablecoin based. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're only providing stablecoin liquidity and trying to accelerate the growth of stablecoin and build the stablecoin payment railways into emerging markets. So like that's the biggest trend like that we're trying to capture and leverage essentially.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned the stablecoin market. I would love to know a little bit more about how the stablecoin market is going to evolve in, let's say, the next half a decade or a couple of years. And you rightly mentioned that US dollar-backed stablecoins are what has taken over the market currently, which has left quite a lot of other currencies devalued. Will there be a lot of work happening in terms of other currencies backed stable coins as well? And how do we see the stable coin market sort of evolve in the next few years?
I think that stablecoins are the greatest crypto use case and are the greatest crypto invention, because like especially like when you think like this is exactly why crypto was made, and I believe that crypto was made for the global majority, because in the and I hate to use this term, but like in the developed world, quote unquote, it's like if I want to send money like to somebody within Europe, or like when I'm in Asia, or even here in the US, it's instant, right? So like living in these places, like you don't understand the like payment issues that a lot of people have in many of these emerging markets, which compromises over 80% of the world, essentially, and like that many people don't essentially realize, right? So stablecoins is just a revolution, because many of these places also have a shortage of essentially US dollars, so people can instantly send and receive money. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are, as long as you have a phone, you have access to internet, you have a crypto wallet. I'm able to send you money instantly on like through like Tether, Circle, and there are a bunch of new stable coins going as well. And recently, like we've witnessed the explosion of essentially new stable coins, right? So like a lot of financial institutions like PayPal have started releasing their own stablecoin. I think Visa is running like a stablecoin program, or so on and so forth. And then you also have new type of stable coins like Mountain Protocol, for example, that give you access to the T-bill yield that they generate. So like you would earn essentially 5% for holding USDM.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I will ask my. Yeah, please go ahead. So sorry, Muluku. Please go ahead.
Yes, no worries. I was gonna say, yeah. So there are like a lot of exciting things happening in the stablecoin space.
Right. And if you talk about non-US backed stablecoin, what sort of a potential do you see in that market? And do you see governments playing a big role in it, or would there be more private firms that would be at play when we talk about such scenario?
Yeah. So for the non-US stablecoins, right? Like I'm quite conflicted about that, because I don't see, for example, in a place like Argentina where the currency is essentially screwed, how does an Argentinian peso help anything? Because it's still a reflection of the real life currency that's actually like deteriorating, right? So I don't really think that places, or especially like in developing economies where the currency is nosediving, that a stablecoin is actually like going to help anything, right? Like in fact, I actually think it's going to accelerate the like nosediving, because like if you have a stablecoin, and it's so much easier to change it to like into other stable coins like USDC or like USDT, then you're actually worsening the essentially currency devaluation, right? But for but that aside, for essentially currencies that are relatively stable, like I feel like a stable coin would add easier interchange, right? So like you'd be much easier like to change from one stable coin to another stable coin, seamless, faster, and with lower fees than you would have currently at your bank. So like I do think that could be something that could be very interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as we head towards the end of our interview, there are a few questions that I still have in mind that I always tend to
Yeah.
ask guests. Mouloukou, when it comes to you, you've obviously had quite a bit of graph. You've had quite a bit of learning curve as well, right from being an investor yourself. You started off with an internship in this space, and then from there on to being a founder at Mansa. What have been some of your key learnings and learning experiences, and any insights that you would like to share with creators or builders in the Web3 space, which I assure you are many. So I think your learnings would be something that we'd love to talk about.
Cheers, thank you. That's actually a really interesting question. I think the biggest learning that I would say is number one, be kind, right? Like people remember you
Oh,
for
I'm so
for like how
sorry. I
they
think
felt, like when they were around you or in your presence. Hi, sorry, can you hear me? I see it blocked.
cut off for a couple of minutes. If you could please start from the very beginning, that would be great.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. No. Worries. So that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that. Like, I think the biggest lesson I learned and that I would encourage everyone to do is number one, be kind, because people remember you for how they felt around you, and people remember and people do things for you because they genuinely like you as a person. Like when others genuinely like you as a person, they want to help you and they want to see you essentially succeed. Number two is be curious. Like have be curious, ask questions, go down rabbit hole, try and find the truth, right? Constantly question your thesis. Number three, like surround yourself with people that are so much better than you, like with people that you want to be like, people that you can learn from, people that can push you and work hard, right? And I think the most important thing is also be humble, be extremely humble. Like when I was 18, I thought I knew everything. Like when I after I left investment banking and went into private equity, I thought I knew everything. But I was completely wrong. When I went into crypto again, like I thought I knew everything. I was just completely wrong. So it's like you should be humble enough to admit that what you know is not as much as like what you think it would require you to get to like where you are. So just be kind, be humble, work hard, and be curious.
Word, I must say, those are some really great pieces of advice for not just entrepreneurs, but anyone who wants to do good in life or wants to sustain or keep on doing what they are doing. So those are some great pieces of advice, Miluku. Almost 7, 8 years in this space. You said you joined crypto in 2018, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that you could change about all the experience that you've had, or if you could go back in time and you could, reverse onto something, what would that be?
To be honest, I'm a deeply religious person, and I believe that everything happens for a reason, and everything happens just as God would want it to happen, and everything interconnects, right? So I wouldn't change anything, because I because if something were to change, like there'd be a huge possibility that we wouldn't be having this interview right now, and like what a pity that would be, right? So like I would keep everything exactly the same.
So true, so true. Thank you so much for those amazing words. And your journey has definitely been inspirational. And I hope and wish that the amazing things that you're trying to do in at Manza, a lot of it has already seen the light of the day. You've managed to clock some amazing numbers in the 65 days that Manza has been around, and you've definitely carved a name and niche for yourself. So thank you so much, Maluku, for joining us today. Before we wrap this up, any last words on our podcast today?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. You've been some really great questions, and thank you so much for your time. Um, I'm reachable on social media. I always reply to good cold DMs. So if anybody feels like wants to reach out, please feel free to.
Absolutely. Big shout out to you and Manza and all the amazing things that you're doing. And I would urge our viewers to check out what Manza is doing and what Mouloukou is up to. I'm sure that these guys would be there in the top ones really soon. You guys have already clocked in great numbers, like I said. And the pleasure was all mine, Mouloukou. Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview with the Coin Republic. Once again, it was my pleasure to have you on the show, and it's been a fantastic conversation indeed. That said, this is it for our show today. We had the amazing Mouloukou, the CEO and co-founder of Mansa, join us despite the cold and despite the health issues that were persistent. It was amazing, and it was really kind of you to join us today. Thank you so much, Mouloukou, and thanks everyone for watching this.